If you're watching this video from anywhere around the world and you are the one tasked for the family to buy your groceries, I don't need to tell you, this is so obvious, but everything has gone up in prices. Poultry, grains, even your milks and cereals, all due to inflation. Especially so in Malaysia, looking at our ringgit sliding against the US dollar, oh wow, that's even more impactful. For Malaysians like me wanting to travel overseas for a holiday, you really think twice, especially to countries where USD is the denominated currency. In this video, I'm going to share with you what we can do as Malaysians with the sliding ringgit against the US dollar and how we can take advantage of it rather than lament and play the victim mentality's hat. So as you can see, the US dollar has strengthened about 11.31% against the ringgit this year, over the past 1 year. As an investor, or if you're not yet an investor, how can we benefit from the sliding of the ringgit and use this position as an advantage to us? So before you go on lamenting and saying or asking why is the Malaysian government not doing more to help us as Malaysians with this ringgit slide, I think let's do some benchmarking and compare our currency strength against other countries within the region and other countries within Asia. So if you're thinking about the best place to holiday now with the current ringgit, I think one of the best places to go to is either Japan or Great Britain with the slide of their currency against the US dollar. I remember the last time I went for a holiday in 2018 to Japan. I think the yen to the ringgit was about 33 to 34. Right now it's about 31, so fantastic. And with the opening up of the Japanese borders, yeah, why not? Back to the currency and the challenge at hand, even though we have not declined as much as the Japanese or the UK, we have slide because of the strengthening of the US ringgit, and we did fairly better comparatively to the other countries within Southeast Asia as well. Now, why does the ringgit sliding matter to the man on the street, especially those who are not an investor or not an entrepreneur? It impacts the most in terms of ceiling prices for food. Now, as you can see from the infographics, the retail prices of poultry, chicken has increased between June and July this year, and those are the guys that are at the marginalized part of our society and really feeling the impact of the rising cost of importing all this food in Malaysia. Now, before we understand the importance of food import to Malaysia, I guess we need to understand what is this thing called the self-sufficiency ratio. Now, the Department of Statistics actually publishes this to show how much produce that we rely on externally comparatively to what we can produce internally. So if any item on the chart has an SSR of more than 100%, that means whatever we produce domestically is more than sufficient to supply the public. And as you can see, chicken, duck egg, we had 113%. That means we are producing 13% more than what is needed locally for domestic consumption, which is actually a good thing. What we lack for and what we require importation is things like rice, but surprisingly, I think due to lack of investments, lack of I think incentives and lack of infrastructure to help the paddy farmers around Malaysia, we still have to import rice and coconut. With all the Malaysian diet, it requires curry, coconut is an important ingredient, and mackerel. So looking at this chart, you would know that what will Malaysians require importation in terms of food comparatively to what is produced domestically. Now, having said all that, even though I did highlight the importance of food importation because of the lack of SSR or self-sufficiency ratio, food importation only makes about 7.3% of our total imports for the country. So that's about 9.1 billion, and this is where the government has to shore up its reserves in terms of foreign currency to be able to buy this food importation. Now, if you want to learn further or understand the nuance of food importation and how it can impact countries, go check out any YouTube video on a good one that has explored the issue in Sri Lanka, where their imports actually took up so much of their country's foreign currency reserve that they could not sustain it because they were not self-sufficient domestically. And the reason why that is important is because in Sri Lanka's case, because they were relying so much on food imports, the government need to shore up a lot of their foreign currency reserves, but they were not generating enough revenue in terms of taxes to be able to sustain that. And because of that, they took on more debt to actually buy more food. And when you have more output than input, this is what actually happens. Now, the saving grace for Malaysia is also this. A lot of our food importation actually comes from China. And if you've not been following the news recently, the Chinese yen has also declined quite substantially against the US dollar, weakest level in 14 years, and is on track for the worst annual performance since 1994. But lucky for us, because of the weakening of the yen, we actually don't need to buy so much more expensive food, because a lot of it comes from China. The next benefit that Malaysia has is actually a lot of our debts are actually domestically or ringgit denominated. So out of the 1.005 trillion ringgit of debts in Malaysia, 97.6% of it is actually ringgit denominated, and a very small percentage is actually in US dollar or the Japanese yen. Now, the Japanese yen, in terms of their interest rates, their floating rates, is very, very low. They've not raised rates as fast as the US has done, and because of that, the advantage to the Malaysian government is that we don't need to pay very high interest rates, especially if the ringgit is the predominant currency for their debts. So the next advantage that Malaysia has, even with the weakening of the ringgit, is actually most of our importation is channeled for intermediate goods, roughly about 53.4%. Now, I would explain intermediate goods in this manner. Now, imagine if a semi-finished semiconductor device, so you're talking about a wafer that comes off a plant in Taiwan, it comes to Malaysia and is packaged by a company like Inari. They package it where it has plastic packaging and lids at the bottom, and this is a value-added process in which Inari performs, makes a profit out of it, and sells it to a final assembler, someone like Foxconn in actually China, to finally assemble the product. So this is one example. Another example would be someone like Petronas Chemicals. They buy crude oil from Saudi Aramco, which they're a partner in the Pengerang project. Crude oil is actually refined, sold, cracked and sold down as gasoline, jet fuel, aviation fuel, and there is a value add to that. So these are examples of intermediate goods or products that actually get value add in Malaysia. Certain companies make a profit out of them and they actually sell them onwards. So you can see, right, even though there is requirements of USD to buy the raw materials, it's actually repriced out in US dollars as well. So net is this, it nets out the effect of the sliding of the ringgit actually. So while I've highlighted the advantages that Malaysia has, even with a sliding ringgit against the US dollar, there are certain concerns that we should be aware of. Now, first of all, political instability in the country. We have many changes of Prime Minister over the past 2 to 3 years. And I think that the general election 15, which is due very soon, is somewhat of a catalyst to stem or to build a very strong foundation for the next 5 years for the government. Why is this important? Because there are certain policies that the government needs to set in place to give clarity to the investment community, the business community, to know whether they should actually invest in Malaysia. So one of the few criteria we should be looking at are things like policies like human capital development. Are we spending enough to reform our education system, make sure it's right on track? Secondly, is actually technology. Is there a widespread adoption, especially in micro SMEs and SMEs, to build better value-added services on top of whatever businesses they are doing now? Are they going to be more efficient with the adoption of technology? Thirdly, I think the connectivity, which is actually what I see as foreign policy. Are we strengthening our bilateral ties with countries within Southeast Asia and the world beyond? Because by strengthening all these bilateral ties and not getting into a fiasco, especially like something that happened between Malaysia and Indonesia, especially about foreign labor policies, this could actually hamper trade within certain countries and dampen economic growth. The fourth, and I think it's pretty important as well, is the establishment of forward forward-looking institutions. Now, what do we mean by forward-looking institutions? Do we have some body like the Khazanah Research Institute that actually provide on-the-ground data, very in-depth research and gives guidance to policymakers, to business owners, to trade commissions, to be able to improve whatever that is already in place. Now, without all these think tanks, without all this forward planning, a lot of things cannot prosper. And last but not least is actually infrastructure. Now, there's a lot of talks about MRT3. I'm looking forward to it because I may be a beneficiary if the line does pass through my area. And it also spurs on, there's a multiplier effect because China's growth today, there's no denying it. A lot of it was done by infrastructure, but excess of it is not good. I mean, you look at where China is with the Evergrande scandal, totally fueled by infrastructure growth is not sustainable. But what it does help is this. Imagine building proper airports, logistics systems to help semiconductor companies in Penang have better logistics infrastructure. Imagine building better roads to Pengerang, where there's a hub for the oil and gas petrochemical facilities that has a lot of value add and compete against the likes of Singapore, the Bukom Islands or the Jurong Islands of Singapore. So all this infrastructure is actually necessary because it spurs further foreign direct investment into the country. And this all ties back to having a very strong, stable government, forward-looking policies. And definitely there's still room to improve. Definitely there's some imperfections within what we have today. But anywhere you go to the US, it's similar. They don't have a perfect system of government as well, but at least they're trying to improve. And here we do so with the help of all of the Malaysian collectively, not just the government. So after being given all these facts and statistics, why does it matter to you as a listener of this particular video? And what is your actionable insights? So if you're just gonna lament, start blaming the government, start tightening your belt with the sliding of the ringgit, you're potentially gonna miss a lot of upside and economic growth once the Federal Reserve stops raising interest rates. And like it or not, even though a big chunk of our exports today is electronics and semiconductor, Malaysia is a beneficiary of the cyclical nature of commodity prices, whether it be crude oil or palm oil. And this is where we get the benefit of this volatility in swings, but also in terms of GDP growth for the country. And if you're not participating either through an investment or either through a business, you are definitely going to miss out on all these cycles. Yes, it comes with the volatility of the down cycle, but then that's where you also make on the up cycle. Where would you begin? Even if you're a novice starting out investor or you're an advanced investor, I think certain things still remain true and is timeless. You start by looking at, where is the growth rate actually happening? And this is a growth rate chart showing Southeast Asian countries, Brunei, 3.6, Cambodia 6.5, Indonesia 5.2, and I think Malaysia is quite up there, 5.4%. So you start looking at what are the regions that will enjoy a certain accelerated growth rate in terms of the economy and GDP. And you begin by looking at the sub-industries within this, what contributed to the growth rate of these GDPs. I think that's where a very good hunting ground you can begin with. I do have a thought on investing in the US. Even though I personally invest in the US and I believe you can get countries with a global scale, global reach, the advantage is we as Malaysians and understanding the nuances and the culture of how businesses is done in Malaysia, that gives us a slight edge over us investing in the US. I'm not denying that you shouldn't invest in the US. They have a strong currency, rising interest rates actually benefit you, but also don't forget the advantage you have being a Malaysian resident here and looking at Malaysian companies. After looking at country-wise in terms of GDP growth, what you can also look at further is actually looking at Malaysia's exports. Who are the Malaysian export champions and how do they generate revenue? How do they run their business? That in itself will also help you hone in on certain champions within the industry and that's where you can start, understanding these businesses and, placing bets on them to see that whether, because of this industry's growth, I can actually benefit if these business operators run their businesses well, and I can actually invest in them for the long run. So there you go. Those are my thoughts on, even though we have a sliding ringgit, I've shown you that Malaysia is not really in a bad place because we have very strong economic fundamentals. Hopefully GE15 will give both foreign and domestic investors alike clarity on certain policies going forward. Last but not least, how do you start benefiting or putting yourself in a position to benefit from even with the sliding ringgit? Is actually understanding growth prospects, GDP growth prospects for each country, and then zoning in on the export driven businesses within that particular country. So if you enjoyed this video, would appreciate a subscription, a like, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.